Honestly, I don't know where to start off with this review because Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is here. It's the sequel to Ghostbusters Afterlife, which for me is a film that I only continue to fall more in love with on every single rewatch, and specifically after watching this movie, it actually made me love that film even more. And the original Ghostbusters for me is just an all-time classic movie. It's one of the films that I loved rewatching as a child, and it's one that I consistently gone back to every single Halloween season. So Ghostbusters Frozen Empire was like right on my mark. It's bringing back the old, it's bringing back the new, it's bringing it and morphing it all together, and has director Gil Kenan, who helped write the last one, but also is writing and directing this one, but he most notably did a film called Monster House, a highly underrated animated horror film. And I was thinking, okay, Frozen Empire is going to be a great mix of those things. He's going to be able to bring in that tragedy and that dramatic avenue that he snuck into Monster House and bring into here. And as a Ghostbusters fan, there's a lot to appreciate in here. There's a lot to have fun with. There's a lot of things to cheer for. But it also is the epitome of fandom. Like, this film is the epitome of fandom. And in a way, this isn't just going to be a review. This is going to be a frustrated rant, but also one on why I like the movie. Like, I am so conflicted as when it comes down to Frozen Empire, and I'm very genuinely interested to see what your guys' thoughts are. As Ghostbusters fans, as people who are just wanting to go and enjoy a movie, how did you feel on this film? It's one that I personally feel conflicted on, because part of me really enjoyed it and would absolutely buy it on Blu-ray, but the other part of me feels it should have been better. That's where I'm here to talk about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So again, leave your thoughts down below, hit that like and subscribe button, and if you don't know what this Ghostbusters film's about, well, it's about the discovery of an ancient artifact that unleashes an evil force that the Ghostbusters new and old must join forces to protect their home and save the world from the second ice age. Everyone's basically back from the original Ghostbusters to the new Ghostbusters Afterlife, and Kumail Nanjiani joins in on the fun this time around. With every review, I like starting out with my pros, so that's where I'm going to talk about it first, even though I'm again gonna get to a rant on some of my frustration. But starting out with the good parts about this, McKenna Grace continues to be the shining spot of these new Ghostbusters movies. She was fantastic in Afterlife, and I was really worried going into this that they were not gonna focus in on that family enough, and we'll talk about that. But thankfully, they continue to still have them be the focus for the most part, and McKenna Grace is still just shining in this. Not as many puns as she delivered in the original, but I think she's kind of opening up as a character. I love this, and for me, if the last film was kind of the introduction of these characters and this film was kind of finally the passing of the torch, if we were to get another Ghostbusters film, I will say right now, this family should be the forefront of it all, and might sound blasphemy, but again, I am a Ghostbusters fan too. Do not have the original characters in this. I'll just tell you right now, just have the new ones. As for that said, I also really liked Carrie Coon in here. I think she was great in Afterlife. I don't think she gets as much to do in this one, but still great. Paul Rudd, interesting development with his character. I think his performance is good, still heartfelt, still funny, but also has to deal with now potentially taking up the father stance of this family, and I actually really like that. I actually wish they would have dove into it a little bit deeper. We'll keep talking about that a little bit later. Finn Wolfhard, also just great. Really like the dynamic between everyone, and if you want me to dive into everybody else, of course Annie Potts is good. Of course Ernie Hudson is great. I mean, Ernie Hudson, out of all the original, I love how they use him in here. In fact, out of all the original Ghostbuster team members, he's actually the only one that actually very much makes sense for why he's here. Dan Aykroyd, I also like. Bill Murray, what did you expect? Running down the rest, Kumail Nanjiani, he's good in here for what it is. I just didn't really like what they did with this storyline. Celeste O'Connor, I honestly think they kind of wasted her, but she's good. And same thing, Logan Kim, podcast. I honestly don't know why he was in here, but he's good for what the role is. Alongside that as well, I do want to give a shout out to Gil Kenan, because I think what Gil is doing here, if you ever watched the original Ghostbusters animated show, which I think is actually quite underrated, this film very much feels like a Saturday morning cartoon at times. And there's pros and cons to that, but as a Ghostbusters fan, I can enjoy and appreciate what they were trying to go for in that avenue. I don't think it totally works for the story itself, but in terms of the comedy, in terms of the entertainment, in terms of the action, it's actually really interesting in what they're able to do. And specifically, like, all the ghosts in here. I think every single one of the effects on the ghost is awesome. And sometimes does get pretty deeply scary, at least for the kids wise. And that is one thing that I was mostly appreciative about. And in fact, like, when I first saw the trailer, I was like, oh, that demon looks hella scary. And I really like how they're making this look. And again, might be blasphemy, but remember, I'm a Ghostbusters fan. The design of this demon is the best design that they've ever done in the entire Ghostbusters franchise. For me, I love how creepy he looked, love how evil he looked, and in general, the frozen empire that he really brings about, the lore, I thought was kind of rivals the original ghosts that they dealt with. My only issue with it is they just didn't dive into it enough. We'll talk about that. I promise you, we'll get to that. But I do have to give a shout out to that. I like how Gil framed that, and I really, in general, liked all the different other ghosts that they also introduced here. Some didn't really get the limelight that I wish they did, but there's one in here called the Possessor that was also really interesting, and in fact is something that a lot of us kind of look into. And specifically when we have films like The Conjuring, and specifically that whole entire Conjuring universe where you see the Warren's house and you see all these different artifacts, they play on that element. There's a lot of new elements that they play off of in this film. Some work, some definitely do not. But the artifact element of it all, the different types of ghosts that you can deal with, I think that again goes to Gil's direction. I think Gil's direction on a horror level, and specifically mixing and matching enough for families to enjoy, but at the same time to give those heebie-jeebies to the kids, I like. For a lot of people who complained about Afterlife's a little bit more serious and dramatic tone, and maybe the tones clashing with one another, I didn't have that personal issue. I think they'll kind of like what they're getting here a little bit more, because it does feel more classic Ghostbusters in a way. Personally wish they would have gone a little bit more Afterlife, and I think that's kind of where I'm here to start talking about a lot of my issues with the film and really start getting into my rant. So overall, my biggest frustration with this film is there's just too many characters, and it takes away from every single character moment, character theme, and in general storyline that needs to be in this film. It feels like they have so many different things going on, and in a way, it made me feel like I was watching a streaming show. And I mean that in the sense that, like, you watch one storyline happen, and it's like, okay, that would be the end of an episode. Then you get to the next episode, and this is what they're dealing with. This, and this. And it's like I watched a 4-piece episode, but within an hour and 55 minutes, and each episode was like only 30 minutes. And there's a bunch of elements missing. And for me, that is where my biggest issue lies within this film. And that's where a lot of my frustration comes from, specifically the more that I think about it. Because I'm like, I enjoyed it, but then I'm sitting over here with a lot of like, what were you thinking? And I think one of the things I should start off with that is McKenna Grace's character. They have a really great through line within this movie of what they're trying to dissect with her character. And then they introduce a new character in her storyline. At first, I wasn't a fan of it. I think it gets a little bit better. It is way too predictable, though. I think it's truly enough the one thing that really frustrated me while watching it is how predictable the storyline is. And while I like the element of what they introduced here, and it is something that I would like to have seen them explore, since it was so predictable, it hurt a little bit of the pacing. Again, I liked where it was trying to go. But the fact that you have that, and then you have this other subplot with Kumail Nanjiani's character, who again introduces some interesting lore in for this ghost. But in the end of the day, I felt that these two storylines could have been mixed together. And I say that is because I love what they're doing with McKenna Grace. And it's tough to say without getting into anything else, but comes a moment in the back half where I was like, you go. And then something fizzles out, and I was like, oh, okay. And like, enjoyable for sure. But there was a character moment that I think was hindered in that point, and specifically hindered her character, and it didn't jive with me all too well. Didn't vibe with me, didn't give me the great feelings that I wanted it to give me, and I kind of felt a little bit distasteful in that moment. And I think there's a lot of moments in here where I wish they would have touched into more of that dramatic avenue that Afterlife had. Afterlife had this really good theming to it. And I'm not saying that it had to be as dramatic, because now we're past the abandonment issues that Carrie Coon's character was feeling from her father, and the abandonment issues that these kids were having, out of place situation that they were feeling, and trying to find where they were in this world. And I like that this film kind of just shoves us right into it. But every character, specifically within this family, just never gets that depth to dive into more. Finn Wolfhard really doesn't have anything to do in here except just be the lovable brother that says some funny things. But Paul Rudd, there's this father element to them that I wish they would have dove in more. I like where it went though. Carrie Coon, the same thing, trying to pair along, having now this father relationship, now being a Ghostbuster, finding her place in this world, specifically from what her father left her. But again, doesn't really go further into this. And I'm saying this as a Ghostbusters fan because I feel and believe a franchise that was born in that time period, that was so beloved and so lovable because of the characters, because of the themes, because of the idea, is a comedy. But I think it can be more. And I think Afterlife showed that. And, you know, as fandom gets to it, this film, while Afterlife had the perfect amount of nostalgia, this film has a lot of it. And all of it's fun, don't get me wrong, but I'm sitting there and I'm loving hearing my, you know, the press screening and the public screening that I was at, like, cheer and clamor, and, like, you get, like, Slimer. Obviously, you've seen him in the trailer. He's in my thumbnail. You see this ghost. You see this thing happen. You see this character get the suit up. And people are cheering, and it's cool. But I felt like Sony and the producers know that some audience members just want that. And that's what they're going for, is cheap things that don't feel earned, where Afterlife earned every single thing. And I felt like while this could have been the passing of the torch, a lot of these other new older characters didn't need to be in it. Specifically Dan Aykroyd. Man, I love you, but stop trying to make Ray like a main character anymore. You did it perfect in Afterlife, but in here he again has a whole subplot. And why? Like, this subplot, interesting, again, adds into the lore. You could have had two of the newer characters do it. Same thing goes for Podcast and Lucky, played by Celeste O'Connor and Logan Kim, who I thought were great in Afterlife. I don't think they were needed to be in here. I don't think they were warranted to be in this film. Now, if you wanted them to be in this film, that's cool. I like the characters, but again, because of all the characters they have in this, there's just too many. And it takes away from everyone. It doesn't really feel like they give them the time of day to be in this, and even deserving that time. Like, they deserve more, just like how Afterlife balanced it all. I just came away from this film going, I want more. I wanted more from this film. And I have this rant now because I feel, as a Ghostbusters fan, we deserve more. We've seen what we can get now from Afterlife. And I like this movie. But at the same time, it is not one of the best Ghostbusters film. I will be doing a ranking later this week, so do tune into that to see where this falls on my list. But it's one that I just sat there enjoying. But for every single thing I enjoyed, there was something in part of me that goes, I think that could have been better. It sucks because the second you hear the proton pack power up, or you hear the Ghostbusters theme song kick in, I mean, that theme song is just so great. Oddly enough, the sound design is like one of my favorite things of the Ghostbusters. And every time I hear a proton pack turn on, or you hear the Ghostbusters car driving down the street and it's just blaring its sirens, I love that shit. Just something that always felt off, and it always fell back to the story. They're trying to do too much for too little of time. Too many characters for too many ideas. And my last point of reference that I wanted to say in here is, and this is one thing that I've noticed with every Ghostbusters movie, is like the main ghost and like the main demon and all that stuff always shows up like towards the last 20 minutes, and that's kind of when we get this. The Frozen Empire concept, I don't think was like completely like brought about. I actually would have probably executed and brought in the Frozen thing maybe an hour in and gave about 40 minutes to that. Maybe even more than that. I would maybe even say like 30 minutes in I would have established this, because we already knew who the Ghostbusters were, and I think it would have been interesting to see like this post-apocalyptic like Ghostbusters take on this, on them trying to save New York that has already been taken by this Frozen Empire. Again, would have been interesting. This lore that they build up with like something called the Fire Master, I think could have gone to a different character. When you see the film, you'll understand what I'm saying with that. But other than that, it's there. It's a Ghostbusters movie. It's one that I liked, but it's one that I'm conflicted on, because as a film critic, I think there's a severe amount of issues in this, but as a Ghostbusters fan, there's enough in there for me to go, yeah, that was enjoyable. So I will say this. I'm going to give this film 2 grades. I genuinely am. If you are a film fanatic that loves movies and so passionately about how movies are made, then I think you're probably going to fall and feel a little bit disappointed in this, specifically if you're not like a huge Ghostbusters fan, and you'll probably give this film around like a C-. If you are a Ghostbusters fan, I think you'll probably be in like the higher B, and that's where like I'm going to settle on, is give this film a B-. My definitive grade, but again, if you are someone who just absolutely loves film and will nitpick stuff and isn't a big fan of the Ghostbusters, this isn't going to be your cup of tea. Again, too many damn characters, enough to enjoy, enough practical effects. I really like the effects in here, and I really like that they settled on this family. And I will say, I really hope we get another one. But this next time, just focus on the main 4 family members. That's all we need. That's who we're cheering for. And if you want to bring in Celeste O'Connor and Logan Kim in here to be like interim Ghostbusters, that's okay with me as well. But I think the passing of the torch is official. Let's give it to these kids. Let's give it to the new ones. And that's all that matters to me. So, thank you so much again for watching, listening to my ramble, my rant, my review of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Make sure to leave your thoughts down below. I'm very curious on that. Look forward to my ranking later this week. And of course, until next time, stay classy.